My wife leaned in close, smelling of expensive lilies and zero regret, and whispered to the head nurse, "He's just a body now. He won't even notice the house is gone. He'll never take another step in this world, so why waste the space?" I sat in that generic, vinyl-smelling wheelchair, my head tilted at a pathetic angle, eyes glazed and staring at a crack in the linoleum floor. To her, I was a broken machine, a piece of meat that had outlived its usefulness. She thought the stroke had erased the man she'd spent 25 years with. She was wrong. The stroke hadn't taken my mind, and it certainly hadn't taken my legs. It had only given me a reason to stay still and watch the person I loved most dig my grave in broad daylight. 2 weeks. That's how long it took for her to sell the home I built with my own 2 hands. 2 weeks of her telling me this nursing home was temporary, a place for intensive rehab, while she was actually at the kitchen table with a realtor, signing away 30 years of memories for 40 cents on the dollar. She thought I was a prisoner behind my own eyelids, incapable of understanding the betrayal unfolding inches from my face. But I was awake. I was listening. And most importantly, I could still walk. My name is Arthur. I'm 61 years old. Before the world went gray and blurry, I was a master contractor. I spent my life obsessed with structural integrity. I could tell you if a foundation was settling by the way a door creaked. I could tell you if a beam was rotting by the scent of the air in a crawl space. I thought I had built a marriage that was code compliant, something that could withstand any storm. I didn't realize the rot was in the person I shared my bed with. Before I show you how a man who was left for dead in a Quiet Harbor nursing home took back his life and his dignity, I want to offer a gentle reminder. Some elements of this story have been altered for narrative and educational purposes. Any similarities to real people or locations are coincidental, but the truth behind the message is meant to help you stay vigilant. Real betrayal doesn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it arrives with a temporary medical plan and a forged signature. I remember the night of the stroke. It wasn't dramatic. There was no pain, just a sudden, heavy coldness that started in my left hand and moved up my arm like a rising tide. I was in the garage, finishing a cedar chest for our daughter's graduation. I tried to call for Claire, but the words felt like they were made of lead in my mouth. I hit the floor. The smell of sawdust, the last thing I knew before the darkness took me. I woke up in a hospital room 3 days later. The fog was thick. I could see Claire sitting in the corner, her face a mask of weary devotion. I wanted to tell her I was back, but my tongue wouldn't follow orders. I saw the doctor come in, a young man who looked like he was in a hurry. He spoke in hushed tones, but my hearing, sharpened by years of listening for the subtle sounds of a house, picked up every word. "The damage to the motor cortex is significant," the doctor said. "He's likely looking at permanent paralysis on the left side. Cognitive function is uncertain." I saw Claire's expression shift. It wasn't grief. It was a flickering light of calculation. "So he won't be able to work? He won't be able to manage the estate?" "It's unlikely," the doctor replied. That was the moment the woman I loved began to disappear, replaced by a vulture. When they moved me to Clearwater Manor, Claire told me it was because they had the best equipment. She kissed my cheek and said, "It's just for a few weeks, Arthur, until you're strong enough to come home." I believed her for the first 48 hours. I worked in the dark, in the silence of my room, trying to wiggle a toe, a finger. By the 3rd night I felt the fire return. My left leg twitched, then my hand. It was a slow, agonizing process, but the builder in me knew how to repair a structure. I didn't tell the nurses, I didn't tell the doctor. I wanted it to be a surprise for Claire. But then came the visit on day 14. Claire walked into my room wearing a new designer coat, a camel hair wrap that must have cost $5,000. She didn't have the rehab progress report in her hand. She had a folder from Stonegate Realty. She sat on the edge of my bed, her hand resting on my limp left arm. Her touch felt like ice. "Arthur," she said, her voice dropping to that fake, soothing tone people use for the dying. The expenses are they're mounting so fast. The hospital bills, the specialists, and this place. It's so expensive to give you the care you deserve. She paused, waiting for a reaction she thought I couldn't give. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, breathing through my nose. A perfect statue of a man. I had to make a very difficult choice, she continued. For us, I sold the house. A developer made a cash offer. It was the only way to ensure you can stay here comfortably for the rest of your journey. My heart did a violent roll in my chest. The house, the one with the hand-turned banisters, the one where we'd raised our kids, the one where I had planned to grow old. She hadn't sold it for my care. She had sold it to liquidate me. Everything is being moved to storage, she whispered, leaning closer. I could see the greed in her eyes now, unvarnished and hungry. I'm moving into that penthouse in the city. You always said it was too noisy, but it's perfect for me. You'll be safe here, Arthur. You won't have to worry about a thing ever again. She stood up, straightened her coat, and walked to the door. She stopped and looked back at me, a look of pure, dismissive pity. You should have retired when I told you to. Now, you're just a line item I've finally balanced. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed was heavy, tasting of industrial bleach and rage. For an hour I didn't move. I just listened to the sounds of the manor, the squeak of the meal carts, the distant muffled moans of other residents, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Then I did something Claire never thought possible. I gripped the side rails of my bed with my right hand. I focused every ounce of my will on my left side. I felt the muscles scream, a white-hot burn that traveled from my hip to my heel. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress. My feet hit the cold, waxed floor. I stood up. My left side was weak, trembling like a leaf in a gale. But it held. I stood there, a ghost in a hospital gown, breathing in the thin air of my own resurrection. I looked at the wheelchair in the corner, the cage she had left me in. "You're wrong, Claire," I whispered, my voice a jagged, terrifying rasp. "I'm not a line item. I'm the one who laid the bricks." I walked to the window. 2 floors down, I saw her silver Mercedes pulling out of the parking lot. She was heading to her new life, a life built on the wreckage of mine. She thought she had performed a perfect demolition. She thought she had cleared the site. She forgot that an architect always keeps a backup set of blueprints. I sat back down in the wheelchair just as the night nurse came in for rounds. I let my head sag. I let my arm go limp. I became the vegetable again. "Still sleeping, Mr. Arthur?" the nurse said gently, checking my IV. "Don't you worry. Tomorrow we'll try the tilt table again. Maybe we'll get you upright for 5 minutes." 5 minutes, I thought, staring at her through my lashes. "I only need 5 minutes to pull the pins on your whole world, Claire." I spent the rest of the night planning. I knew I couldn't just walk out the front door. I had no money, no phone, and legally I was under her guardianship. I was a non-person, but I had one thing she didn't realize I still possessed: the master access code to our family's digital trust. I had set it up years ago, a secure, encrypted vault where I kept the records of every property I'd ever built, every investment I'd ever made, and the disaster recovery keys for our finances. Claire thought she had the only set. She didn't know that I had mirrored the account to a hidden drive in my old workshop, the workshop she was currently having cleared out by junk removal specialists. I had exactly 48 hours before that drive was hauled to a landfill. 48 hours to prove that I was more than a body. I looked at the red emergency button on my bedside remote. I didn't press it. I didn't need a nurse. I needed a phone, and I knew exactly where to find one. I waited until 3 a.m. The manor was in its deepest sleep. I stood up again, my movements smoother this time, the memory of my muscles returning with every step. I crept to the door, peering through the small glass window. The hallway was empty, lit only by the flickering glow of a single fluorescent tube. I walked. No cane, no walker, just the sheer cold momentum of a man who was walking back from his own funeral. I reached the nurse's station. The night attendant was asleep in a chair, a romance novel open on her lap. Her desk phone was sitting right there, glowing in the dark. I picked up the receiver. My hand was steady. I dialed a number I hadn't called in a decade, the number of the one man who owed me a debt that could never be repaid in cash. My old apprentice, Elias. "Yeah?" a groggy voice answered. "Elias," I rasped. "It's Arthur. I'm at Clearwater Manor, room 212. There was a long silence on the other end. "Arthur? They said you were gone. They said you couldn't speak. They lied," I said, watching the sleeping nurse stir. "I need a car. I need a suit, and I need you to get to my workshop before the junk haulers do. There's a red toolbox under the floorboards in the back corner. Inside is a black drive. Get it. Now." "I'm on my way, boss." I hung up and slipped back into the shadows. I walked back to my room, every step a victory, every breath a declaration of war. Claire thought she was moving into a penthouse. She thought she had turned the page. She had no idea that the useless body she left behind was currently rewriting the ending. The demolition was live, and I was the one holding the remote. The nursing home at 4 in the morning is a place where time doesn't exist, only the heavy, rhythmic sighing of people who have been forgotten by the world. The air is thick with the scent of floor wax and the faint, sour metallic tang of medicine. I sat in my darkened room, listening to the soft, squeaky wheels of a nurse's cart 2 hallways over. I wasn't in my bed. I was on the floor, my back against the cold radiator, my teeth gritted so hard I thought they would shatter. I was doing something the doctors said I'd never do again. I was counting, not minutes, not seconds, but repetitions. 1, lift the left leg. 2, hold the vibration in the muscle. 3, lower it without making a sound. Every movement felt like pulling a rusted chain through a narrow pipe. My left side was a foreign country, stubborn, numb, and angry. But rage is a powerful fuel. Every time I felt like collapsing, I pictured Claire's face as she told the nurse I was just a body. I pictured her camel hair coat, and the way she didn't even look back when she walked out of my life. She thought the stroke had made me a spectator. She didn't realize it had turned me into a hunter. I spent 6 hours every night in that darkness, training like an athlete for a game no one knew was being played. By day, I was the quiet patient in room 212. I let my jaw hang. I let the physical therapists move my limbs like they were pieces of damp wood. I let the nurses talk over me as if I were a piece of furniture. It was the hardest acting job of my life, but I needed them to believe the lie, because as long as they believed I was helpless, they'd keep talking. And as long as they talked, I learned. I learned that Claire hadn't visited since she dropped the news about the house. I learned that she had called the manor to ask about end-of-life protocols, even though I was stable. She wasn't waiting for me to get better. She was waiting for the paperwork to be neat enough to bury. On the 3rd night after my call to Elias, a shadow appeared at my window. We were on the 2nd floor, but there was a sturdy oak tree just outside, one I'd noted during my first glimmer of consciousness. A figure tapped on the glass. I stood up, my legs trembling but holding, and unlocked the window. Elias climbed inside, smelling of wood smoke and rain. He was 40 years younger than me, a man I'd trained since he was 18. He looked at me, standing there in my hospital gown, and for a second he looked like he wanted to cry. "Boss," he whispered, You're really standing." "I told you, Elias," I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel under a boot. "Contractors don't quit until the job is inspected. Did you get it?" Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black external drive. It was dusty, still carrying the scent of the cedar shavings from my workshop. The junk haulers were there when I arrived. I told them I was your nephew and that you wanted the red box. They didn't care. They just wanted to clear the space for the staging crew. "Staging crew?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. The house is already being repainted, Arthur. They're stripping your hand-carved molding, replacing it with that cheap whitewashed stuff people like now. The developer wants it ready for a quick flip. I felt a fresh wave of ice in my veins. And the drive? You checked the encryption? Elias handed me a ruggedized laptop he'd brought in his pack. It's all there. Every file, every camera link. Arthur, I've been looking into the developer who bought the place. It isn't a company. It's a private buyer using a shell corporation. I sat on the edge of the bed and plugged the drive into the laptop. The blue light of the screen felt like a spotlight in the dark room. My fingers, still stiff on the left side, fumbled with the keys, but the muscle memory was there. I bypassed the nursing home's Wi-Fi firewall and connected to my private cloud server. 10 years ago, when I started building high-end custom homes, I began installing owner override systems. I told the clients it was for security, but really, it was my signature. Every house I built had a hidden server that tracked the electrical load, the humidity, and the security feeds. My house, the one I'd built for Claire, was the prototype. I logged into the active feed of 412 Maple Street. The screen flickered, then resolved into a high-definition view of my own living room. It was empty. The furniture I'd built was gone. The walls were a sterile, hollow white. I felt a pang of grief, like looking at a corpse. But then the front door opened. Claire walked in. She was laughing. She was holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. And then he walked in behind her. I gripped the laptop so hard the plastic groaned. It wasn't a developer, it wasn't a stranger, it was Victor Sterling. Victor had been my primary competitor for 20 years. He was the man who cut corners, the man who used substandard concrete and bribed inspectors. We had fought over every major contract in the county. 3 years ago, I'd beaten him out for the riverfront project, a deal that nearly bankrupted him. He had looked me in the eye that day and told me he'd see me in the dirt. Now he was standing in my living room, his arm around my wife. "To the new palace," Victor said, his voice echoing through the laptop speakers. He popped the cork, the sound sharp and celebratory. "And to the man who paid for it. I have to admit, Jules, I didn't think you could pull it off. The nursing home was a stroke of genius. He was always so easy to manipulate, Victor," Claire said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "He thought I was his foundation. He never realized I was just waiting for the concrete to crack. The house sale is through escrow on Friday. Once I have the final signature from the conservatorship board, the $20 million in the trust moves to our joint account." $20 million, Victor mused, pouring the wine. "I can finally finish the Sterling Towers. And Arthur? What happens when he finds out?" Claire laughed. A sound I used to think was beautiful, but now sounded like a serrated blade. "He won't find out. The doctors say his cognitive decline is accelerating. By the time he realizes the house is gone, he won't even remember who he is. I've already authorized a sedation-heavy care plan. He'll spend the rest of his life staring at a wall, dreaming of blueprints." I looked at the screen. My wife, my best friend, my life. They weren't just taking my money, they were erasing my existence. They were planning to drug me into a stupor so I wouldn't be an inconvenience to their new life. "Arthur," Elias whispered, watching the screen over my shoulder. "What do we do? I can call the cops. This is fraud. It's premeditated." "No," I said, closing the laptop. My voice was no longer a rasp. It was the voice of the man who had commanded a 100-man crew through a blizzard. "The cops will take months. They'll get lawyers. They'll hide the money. I'm not looking for a settlement, Elias. I'm looking for a demolition. Boss, you said the closing is Friday?" "That's what she said." "Good," I said, looking at my left hand. I forced it to form a fist. It shook, it burned, but it closed. "That gives me 48 hours to finish my rehab." I turned to Elias. "I need you to do 3 things. First, go to my old office. In the safe behind the framed permit for the City Hall project, there's a folder marked Sterling 2018. It contains every substandard material invoice Victor ever tried to hide. Second, I need you to find the notary Claire is using for the conservatorship papers. I have a feeling her notary is someone on Victor's payroll." "And the third thing?" Elias asked. I looked at the wheelchair in the corner of the room. "The third thing is a suit, my charcoal gray one, the one I wore when I won the riverfront contract. And, Elias, make sure you have a camera ready. I want to make sure we capture the exact moment the structure fails." Elias nodded, his face hardening. He climbed back out the window, disappearing into the shadows of the oak tree. I was alone again. I didn't go back to bed. I walked. I walked in circles around that small, cramped room. I walked until my left leg felt like it was made of molten lead. I walked until the sun began to bleed through the blinds, turning the room a pale, clinical gray. When the morning nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, came in with my breakfast tray, I was in my wheelchair, my head was tilted, my eyes were vacant. "Good morning, Arthur," she said, setting the tray down. "It's a beautiful day. Maybe we'll get you out to the garden for some sun?" I didn't answer. I just stared at a spot on the wall. "Poor dear," she sighed, patting my hand. "It's a shame. You were such a builder. Now you're just here." "I'm not just here, Sarah," I thought, watching her leave. "I'm the one who's counting the seconds. I'm the one who's watching the cracks spread." I looked at the Quiet Harbor brochure on my nightstand. It promised peace, security, and a home for the soul. I picked it up with my right hand and ripped it in half. The countdown had begun. Claire thought she had sold the house. Victor thought he had stolen the kingdom. They were currently at my dining table, drinking my wine, planning my chemical lobotomy. They thought they had won the game. They had no idea I was the one who built the table. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched a sparrow land on the oak tree. My left side didn't tremble. My vision was clear. "Enjoy the penthouse, Claire," I whispered to the glass, "because on Friday I'm coming to collect the rent, and I don't take checks." The air in room 212 felt like a cemetery before the first shovelful of dirt. For 3 nights, I had been a ghost, haunting my own recovery. My left side, once a dead weight, was now a source of slow, pulsing heat. I was rebuilding my nervous system the way I had once rebuilt a Victorian foundation, brick by brick, synapse by synapse. By Thursday evening, I could walk the length of my room 40 times without catching my breath. I could grip a glass of water with my left hand, though it shook with the effort of 1,000 battles. I was ready, but I wasn't just walking toward health, I was walking toward a demolition. Before I show you the final act of this betrayal, the moment I walked through my own front door to find my wife celebrating with the man who tried to ruin me, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever had someone look at you as if you were already gone, while you were still very much there, watching their every move? Tell me your story in the comments. I read them all, and they are the foundation of this community. Friday morning arrived with a thin, watery sun that did nothing to warm the clinical white of the manor. At 9 a.m., Claire walked into my room. She didn't look like a wife visiting a recovering husband. She looked like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. She was wearing a sharp charcoal black suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She didn't kiss me. She didn't ask how I slept. She just sat in the chair by the window, crossing her legs with a soft rustle of silk. "Today is the big day, Arthur. The closing is at noon. I've brought the final conservatorship authorization. The notary is waiting downstairs. I just need you to— Well, you don't even need to sign. Just a thumbprint will do. The board understands your condition." I sat in my wheelchair, my head tilted toward my shoulder, my mouth slightly agape. I let a thin string of saliva pool at the corner of my lip. I wanted her to feel a flicker of disgust. I wanted her to see a man who was already half buried. She leaned in, and I could smell the expensive lilies again. It was the scent of a funeral. "It's better this way, Arthur, really. You'll be safe here. No more stress about contracts. No more fighting with Victor. I'm taking care of everything. I'm the hero of this story, don't you see? I'm the one who saved the estate while you broke." She took my left hand. The hand she thought was paralyzed. It was cold and limp. She pressed my thumb onto an ink pad, then onto the bottom of a legal document that would effectively erase my rights as a human being. There, all done. I'll see you in a few weeks, Arthur. Or maybe longer. I hear the penthouse has a wonderful view of the park. I'll think of you when I'm watching the sunset. She stood up, tucked the portfolio under her arm, and walked out without a backward glance. She thought she had just taken the final step. She didn't realize she had just triggered the detonation. 10 minutes later, the night nurse, Sarah, came in to check my vitals. She was a kind woman, but like everyone else here, she spoke to me in that high-pitched voice people use for infants. "Ready for your sponge bath, Arthur? Let's get you nice and clean for the weekend." I waited until she turned toward the basin. Then I stood up. I didn't use the rails. I didn't stumble. I stood tall, my shoulders square, my eyes clear and focused. Sarah turned around and let out a strangled shriek, dropping the washcloth. "Arthur, you can talk? You can stand?" "I don't need a bath, Sarah. I need my clothes." My voice was a gravelly roar, the sound of a man who had been silent for far too long. Sarah backed away, her hand over her mouth. "Arthur, you can talk? You can stand?" "I've been standing for a week, Sarah, and right now I need you to do me a favor. If you ever liked me, if you ever thought it was wrong for my wife to leave me here to rot, you're going to help me get to the parking lot. No questions, no alarms." Sarah looked at me, then at the door, then back at the man who had just resurrected in front of her eyes. She gave a small, brave nod. "The service elevator is at the end of the hall. The laundry crew is coming up in 5 minutes. If you put on a maintenance jacket, no one will look twice." Elias was waiting by the oak tree in a nondescript black SUV. He had the suit I asked for, my charcoal gray one, pressed and sharp. He had the black drive, and he had a look on his face that told me he was ready to watch the world burn. "Closing is in 30 minutes, Arthur. They're meeting at the house. Victor, Claire, and the realtor. The realtor is Victor's brother, isn't he?" "You guessed it. It was a closed-loop scam. They sell the house to a shell company for half price. Then Victor flips it for a massive profit, and they split the insurance and the trust money. They were going to leave you with nothing but a Medicaid bed. Drive, Elias. I want to be there before they pop the second bottle." As we pulled onto Maple Street, the neighborhood I had built with my own sweat and blood, I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the same feeling I had before a major demolition. That moment when the charges are set, the perimeter is clear, and all that's left is to press the button. The house looked different. The beautiful cedar siding I had painstakingly stained was covered in a cheap, modern gray paint. My hand-carved front door had been replaced by a generic glass-paneled one. They were erasing me before the ink on the deed was even dry. We parked 2 houses down. I checked the black drive one last time. It contained the owner's override codes for the smart home system. I could hear them before I even reached the porch. Music, jazz, the same tune Claire had been humming in the hospital. I reached the front door. I didn't use a key. I used my phone to trigger the digital override. I walked into the foyer. The smell of fresh paint was overwhelming, but underneath it was the scent of expensive cigars, Victor's brand. They were in the dining room. Claire was sitting at the head of the table, the legal papers spread out in front of her. Victor was standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders, looking like the king of a stolen castle. A man in a cheap suit, the notary, was checking his watch. "It's a masterpiece, Jules. By this time tomorrow, the Sterling-Vance merger will be the talk of the city. And Arthur? Well, Arthur will be a distant memory. To the future, Victor. To the penthouse." They raised their glasses. The crystal clinked, the same crystal I had bought for our 20th anniversary. I stepped into the archway of the dining room. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my hands in my pockets, watching the color drain from their faces as if someone had pulled a plug in their souls. Claire dropped her glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the wine spreading like a bloodstain across the wood I had polished 1,000 times. Victor's hands flew off her shoulders, and he stumbled back, hitting the sideboard. The silence was absolute. It was the sound of a structural failure. You missed a spot with the paint, Victor, near the crown molding. I told you years ago you never had an eye for detail. My voice was low, steady, and carried the weight of 30 years of authority. I walked toward the table, every step firm, every movement a declaration that the body was back. Arthur? How are you? You're supposed to be... Supposed to be what, Claire? Sedated? Forgotten? A line item you finally balanced? I reached the table and picked up the conservatorship papers. I looked at the ink-stained thumbprint, the mark of my supposed demise. I ripped the paper in half. Then I ripped it again. This doesn't change anything, Arthur. The house is sold. The deed is transferred. You're a sick man who escaped a mental facility. I'll call the police. Call them, Victor. I've already called the district attorney, and the building inspector, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I pulled the black drive from my pocket and set it on the table. You see, Victor, when I built this house, I didn't just install security cameras. I installed a forensic audit system. Every conversation you've had in this room for the last 48 hours has been recorded and uploaded to a secure cloud server. The realtor scam? The plan to drug me in the manor? Your confession about the substandard concrete on the Sterling Towers? It's all there. Victor lunged for the drive, but I was faster. I caught his wrist with my left hand, the hand he thought was dead. I squeezed until I heard the small, satisfying pop of a tendon. He let out a whimper and fell to his knees. I'm a builder, Victor. I know exactly how much pressure a joint can take before it snaps, both in a building and in a man. I turned to Claire. She was backed into the corner, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She wasn't the hero anymore. She was just a woman standing in the ruins of a lie she wasn't smart enough to finish. You told the nurse I wouldn't even notice the house was gone. You were wrong, Claire. I noticed everything. I noticed the way you looked at my competitor. I noticed the way you signed my name. And I noticed the exact moment you stopped being my wife and started being a scavenger. That's the demolition crew, Claire, and they're here to clear the site. The front door burst open. It wasn't the nurses. It was the police, led by a man in a trench coat I recognized from the city's fraud division. I sat down in my chair at the head of the table. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel the joy of revenge. I just felt the cold, hard peace of an engineer who had finally removed the rot from the building. But as they led Claire and Victor out in handcuffs, Claire turned back one last time. Her eyes were filled with a flickering, desperate hatred. You think you won, Arthur. Check the offshore accounts. Victor was smarter than you think. By the time they process us, the money will be in Singapore. You'll be a healthy man, but you'll be a broke one. She let out a jagged, hysterical laugh as they pushed her toward the cruiser. I looked at the black drive on the table. I looked at the house around me. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the draft in the foyer. The demolition was over, but the excavation was just beginning. I had my legs back, but I had to find out if there was anything left of my life worth standing on. Claire's laughter echoed through the empty hallway, a sharp, jagged sound that carried the weight of her final, desperate play. She thought she had the last word. She thought that even if I had my legs, she still had the prize. She stood by the police cruiser, her designer coat ruffled, her eyes burning with a venomous satisfaction as she looked at the house she had tried to steal. To her, money was the only foundation that mattered. To her, a man was only as valuable as the digits in his bank account. But as the door of the cruiser slammed shut and the sirens began their slow, rhythmic fade into the distance, I didn't reach for my phone to check the accounts. I didn't panic. I didn't even look at the notary who was being loaded into a separate car. I simply walked back into my living room, sat in my old chair, the only piece of furniture they hadn't managed to haul away yet, and waited for the silence to settle. Before I reveal what really happened to those offshore accounts and the final crushing blow I delivered to Victor Sterling's empire, please take a moment to subscribe to the Otis Archive. This channel is a sanctuary for those of us who have been left for dead, only to find our footing again. Your support is the concrete that allows these stories to stand. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe that a man's true strength is found in his muscles or in the blueprints he keeps in his mind? I looked at the black drive sitting on the dining table. Claire was right about one thing. Victor was a shark. He had been moving money for months, using a complex series of shell companies and high-frequency transfers to scrub the trail. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game of digital hide-and-seek. But Victor was a builder who cut corners. He was a man who looked at a finished wall and assumed the wiring inside was perfect just because the paint was smooth. He forgot that I was the one who designed the network. When I set up the family trust years ago, I didn't just hire a lawyer. I wrote a structural integrity protocol into the digital backend. It was a simple piece of code, a tripwire. If a transfer of more than $50,000 was initiated without my biometric scan or a specific 32-digit override code, the funds wouldn't go to Singapore. They wouldn't go to the Caymans. They would be redirected into a holding vault, a ghost account that looked active but was essentially a digital black hole. Victor and Claire had spent the last week watching numbers move on a screen, believing they were becoming rich. In reality, they were just watching a simulation. The $20 million hadn't moved an inch. It was sitting in a secure escrow account managed by a firm in Zurich that only answers to me. I picked up the phone and dialed Elias. "Boss, the police just cleared the perimeter. You okay?" "I'm fine, Elias. Tell the Zurich team to release the hold. Move the funds into the restoration account. And, Elias, call the foreman at the Sterling Towers site. Tell him the city inspector is coming tomorrow morning with the invoices I found in Victor's safe. The substandard concrete invoices." There was a pause and then a low, grim chuckle. "That's going to level the whole project, Arthur. Victor will be lucky if he only gets 20 years. A building with a rotten foundation shouldn't be allowed to stand, Elias," I said, looking at the cheap gray paint on my walls. "It's a safety hazard." The next 6 months were a blur of physical therapy and legal warfare. The quiet patient from room 212 was gone, replaced by a man who walked with a slight limp but a terrifyingly focused stride. The trial of Claire and Victor Sterling was the lead story in the regional news for weeks. The nursing home heist, the papers called it. The fake notary, who turned out to be a disgraced paralegal on Victor's payroll, sang like a bird the moment the FBI mentioned racketeering charges. He gave up everything, the dates, the forged signatures, the plan to keep me sedated until I faded away. Victor's empire collapsed in a matter of days. Once the news of the substandard concrete broke, every one of his projects was halted. The city filed a massive lawsuit, and his investors turned on him like a pack of wolves. He lost his firm, his reputation, and his freedom. He was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security facility. The man who wanted to build towers ended up in a 6x9 cell. Claire fared no better, because she had been the one to authorize the sedation plan and had personally handled the forged conservatorship papers. She was charged with attempted murder by neglect and grand larceny. She tried to play the victim during the trial, crying about how overwhelmed she was by my stroke, how she just wanted peace for us both. But then the prosecution played the recordings from the black drive. They heard her laughing with Victor. They heard her call me just a body. They heard the cold, calculated greed in her voice as she planned to move into a penthouse while I stared at a wall. The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty. She was sentenced to 18 years. As they led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she finally looked at me. There was no remorse in her eyes. No, "I'm sorry." Only a flickering, desperate confusion, as if she still couldn't understand how a man she thought was broken had managed to stand up and walk over her. I didn't stay for the final sentencing. I had work to do. I moved back into the house on Maple Street. I didn't keep the modern gray paint. I spent 3 months stripping it back to the original cedar. I tore out the generic glass door and spent my weekends in the workshop, hand-carving a new one out of solid oak. Rehab wasn't just about my leg anymore. It was about the house. Every time I sanded a board or hammered a nail, I felt the strength returning to my left side. I was building myself back into the man I was, but with a different kind of wisdom. I learned that you can't build a life for someone else. You can provide the shelter, you can provide the luxury, but if they don't have the integrity to appreciate the work, they will eventually try to burn the house down for the insurance money. I'm 61 years old now. I still go to the gym every morning. I still walk 3 miles every evening. The limp is almost gone. A faint reminder of the night I hit the floor in the garage. One afternoon, a car pulled up the driveway. It was Sarah, the night nurse from the manor. She had left her job there after the trial and was working at a private clinic downtown. She stood on the porch, looking at the restored cedar and the oak door. "It's beautiful, Arthur," she said, smiling. "You really are a builder." "It's a good foundation, Sarah," I said, offering her a seat on the porch swing I'd just finished. It just needed to be cleared of the rot. We sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the trees. The air smelled of freshly cut wood and the coming autumn. For the first time in 25 years, the house felt quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of a prison, but the light, honest silence of a home that belonged to me. Looking back on that night in the nursing home, I realized that the stroke wasn't the end of my life. It was a stress test. It was the moment the universe decided to see if the man I claimed to be was actually the man I was. It stripped away the money, the house, and the woman I thought loved me, until there was nothing left but my own will to survive. If you're listening to this, and you feel like you've been left in a room to rot, if you see the people you trust measuring you for a grave, remember this: they only see what they want to see. They see a body, they see a victim, they see a line item. But you are the architect. As long as you can breathe, you can plan. As long as you can think, you can build. And as long as you can take that first shaking step, you can walk away from the cage they built for you. Don't be afraid of the demolition. Sometimes, the only way to see the true strength of a structure is to let the storm hit it and see what's left standing. Your dignity doesn't need a house to live in. Justice isn't a payout from an account. It's the peace of knowing that you are the one who laid the last brick. Thank you for watching this story through to the end. It has been an honor to share my journey with you. If this story moved you, please share it in the comments. I truly value every voice in this community. Tell me, have you ever had to find the strength to walk when the world told you to stay still? Your resilience is the foundation of the Otis Archive. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with someone who might be losing hope today. Let them know that the resurrection is possible. It just starts with one step. Take care of each other, stay vigilant, and remember, the most important thing you'll ever build is your own peace.